I wrote a little song to remind you Choice Hotels get you more of the experiences you value. The Cambria Hotel's got it all. A rooftop bar, have a ball. Cocktails up here feel just right. Is Cambria amazing? Alright. Bring a date, your team, or even your mom. Book direct at choicehotels.com. See you on the roof.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome to How Are the podcast. And we've already had a couple of end-of-season award shows since the season ended in that incredible day when Chelsea came to town and our European adventure next season was confirmed. But today we begin our big fat review of Sunderland AFC's 2025-26 season. And that's easy for me to say. Over a couple of parts, we'll go through the highs and lows and remind ourselves just what a fantastic season it has been. And the fact that at times it required a level-headed manager to navigate us through and a level-headed fan base as well at times, because there was some wobbly moments in there, which we'll go through, as well as the fantastic moments. Because to do this, we wanted to do something which usually shocks us if the schedules allow us to do this. Because I have Gav and Martin to help me go through it all. And first up, I'm going to welcome Gav. Hello, mate.
Hello, mate. You got through that intro without any issues. Well done.
It's far too early in the morning. I'm trying to think about what to say on the hoof, mate. It's far too early.
I was trying to think of like an analogy, like which Sunderland manager? Maybe Simon Grayson wrote your intro. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, not just wrote the intro, delivered it. I remember him on the flip chart.
he was a oh Jesus Christ. We're talking about Simon Grayson and ahead of a.
I know. You brought him up.
Yeah, I know, my fault. Sorry, mate.
Well, you say I was going to go Mick Buxton, so I mean it was going to be an incredible start to this season review there. But yes, mate. Look, this is the end of our full season doing How We're the podcast. And we're now over the 500 episodes mark. And to be honest, I'm a little bit proud that we got through it and covered every single day this season, Gav.
I think we just need to take credit for Sunderland's rise, really, because we started How We're the podcast in March of 2025, and ever since then it's just been up. So I'm taking full credit for that. 500 odd episodes is mad, really. Like, I mean, we get this quite a lot from listeners who just email us to say, they love the daily podcast and we don't know how you do it. I've even heard, we speak to journalists and things like that, and they're like, how on earth do you do a podcast every day? It's just the easiest thing in the world, isn't it, to talk about Sunderland, particularly when things are going well. I mean, if this was the David Moyes, Simon Grayson, Chris Coleman, Jack Ross era, it might not have been as easy to do a pod every single day. But when you're getting promoted in the most dramatic of fashions and then having your best ever Premier League season, I think it's very, very easy to talk about Sunderland every single day, isn't it? So, but yes, very proud of us. We've done well.
Well, knowing the nerds that we are, I'm sure if Sunderland was still in League One and we started this up doing a daily podcast, we would still done it every single day throughout the season. Because last but not least, we also have Martin Wanless with us. Hello, mate.
Hello, mate. 500 seems a lot when you look back on it, doesn't it? But it's been an awful lot of fun. And, we started this at the tail end of the championship season, didn't we? We didn't obviously know that we're going to go up to the Premier League, and Premier League football and the summer that we had made it probably a little bit easier because there was so much to talk about, wasn't it? But it's been quite an incredible season to chart and to talk about and look back on now. And it's been an awful lot of fun.
Yeah. And not just the amount of episodes, mate, doing it every single day, but of course with yourself doing the On This Week, covering that. And I was on a handful of those, mainly because they took about 2 days to record. That I wasn't able to maybe do all of them, but if you actually tot up the hours, because you're talking, we were talking throughout the season that sometimes we might have done a daily episode, but that daily episode was 3 hours long.
I did tot it up. I can't remember exactly what the total was, but I recall that you could walk from Land's End to John O'Groats and listen to On This Week episodes and still be listening by the time you reach your destination. So there's a fair chunk there. And look, there's different bits to this, isn't there? So like obviously we've done podcasts that are reacting to things that are going on, signings and how we feel after a game and talking about games. The On This Week stuff that we've done, it's recording Sunderland history, and it's never been done before in the way that we've done it. And, we're continuing that forever, really, within different sort of guises and different types of stories. But it's all part of the rich tapestry that goes to make this football club. And, people will look back and listen to some of these podcasts in a few years' time, maybe in 20 years' time, and go, God, what did they think after that playoff final win? Or what did they think? Well, I hope they don't listen to that one, because that was me and you, and we didn't know what on earth had happened. But what on earth were people feeling like after the Chelsea game? Can you imagine if we could go back and listen to the fans' reaction after the FA Cup final win in '73? It would be so interesting and intriguing to go back and listen to that sort of stuff. Go back to listen to people, how they felt about McMenemy and there's all this sort of stuff. It's really important, and it's good to record it all, and it's there forever, isn't it? It's funny. I was it's completely off the topic, but it's actually quite a nice bit of context for what we're going to talk about today. Because I was listening to the podcast that me and Gav and Craig did after Lee Johnson got sacked. If you kind of look at that as a watershed moment in Sunderland history, I put down last week just to kind of go like, what were we actually feeling like at that time? And it's quite incredible to look back on just what's happened in those 4.5 years, because it's not a long period of time, and we have covered so much and covered so much ground as a football club. That change in mood and sentiment, just how we're feeling about things, it's astronomical. So yeah, it's all good fun. Fortunately, this season there's been plenty to talk about.
That's it. It is an interesting one, because things change over time. Who knows? If they'd done a podcast before the '73 Cup final, they might have been saying, that Dave Watson's not in good form in the league going into this final. I'm a bit worried about him, or something like that. You just don't know, because I suppose if we'd done the prep properly for this, we might have listened to hours and hours of us talking at the beginning of this season, to go back and see what our thoughts were then. But actually, Gav, just talk about that watershed moment. You've been at some of these watershed moments. You were at the Bolton game as well, weren't you?
I was, yes. I left early. one of the handful of times in my life I've ever left a game early. I was in the car before the game had even finished. I think we were actually at the services in the first services, and the game was still going on. Now, just as you were saying that there about '73, people what people might have been saying around the game. Talk about Dave Watson. People probably going, "What's Stokoe thinking of putting a striker at centre half? What does he think he's doing?" Madness from the man. But no, it's been a crazy ride, a really crazy ride. I mean, I actually think when we sit back, probably in, you think about the '73 cup run, and you lads have obviously chronicled it on the pods this year. But you think like 50 years has passed, and I wonder in 50 years how this era will be looked upon, because we all look back at the Peter Reid era with immense fondness. But I actually think, as I'm living in the moment, I think this is the best it's ever been in my life. And I wonder how in sort of 10, 20 years we'll look back at this, the way we've won the derbies, the way we got promoted, going up through the playoffs twice. Like I've genuinely had the best memories of my time as a Sunderland fan. And then in the coming season, I'm going to watch them in Europe. And it's just like, we are living in probably the greatest era of our lives. And it all started in League One. It all started in League One with some really poor players, really poor managers, having to go to some awful places. And, but I actually think that made us, and we had to go through all that shite to be where we are today. You think about probably the worst point of all of this was, going down, for me anyways, was going down and losing to Burton at the Stadium of Light when Bent scored. And I never felt lower than that. And even at the various points in League One where it was crap, I thought that was the worst ever. But, all of these things that we've gone through, were worth it to get our club in the state it's in now. There are so many, fan bases who would love to be in Sunderland's position. But I think the reason we are, you see the team on the pitch and they all love it, and the fans are in synergy with them. And you look at the way like people like Granit Xhaka have bought into everything about this football club. I don't think any of that happens if we don't sink to the bottom of the ocean. I think we'd just be milling around maybe in the Championship, bobbing between the Premier League and the Championship maybe occasionally, not with any real purpose as a football club. I think that's always going to be our baseline of like you don't ever allow it to go as low as that again. We always have that in the back of our minds, and we use that to motivate ourselves. And I'll never forget Bolton. I'll never forget losing to Rotherham 4-1 or 5-1. I can't remember what it was. Chef Wed a couple of days later getting battered at Hillsborough when I saw you outside, Chris. That was a bad time to be a Sunderland fan. That was a bad time to be a Sunderland fan when we were going away and getting battered off crap teams. And I'll never forget that moment because it should always be there, shouldn't it, to keep ourselves grounded.
Yeah, I think it was 9-year-old at the time looking up at us going, "Why is Sunderland so crap, Daddy?" Well, okay, yeah. You're certainly not the first kid to ask their dad that over the years. But just to put a bookmark on the conversation, Gav, from where we started, we've done every day since, I want to say last March, April, over 500 episodes.
March, I think.
We're going to be here throughout the summer, every single day, and next season again, Gav?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I mentioned it before, but we get and I'm not making this up. People might think, they're just saying this, but we get messages and emails every single day, either on social media or whatever, from people just saying thanks. Thanks for doing every podcast every day. I'll not say who the guy was, but we had somebody on the podcast recently, and when we stopped recording, he said, "I just want to let you know that your podcast got me through some really dark times a few months back when I was struggling, having that to listen to every single day." So we understand what people think of us and what it means to them, and I think for a lot of people as well, exiles especially, of which you were both exiles, but a lot of people they don't hear that familiar voice every day that they know from growing up and back home, and sticking the pod on is that link back to where they're from. So not to get too deep, but yeah, we're not going anywhere. We're going to keep going through the summer. There's so much to do as well. If I think back to last summer, I know it was a crazy summer, but there was so much transfer stuff to react to and people to talk to about the players we were signing. And we've got a massive schedule already put together, haven't we, of people we're going to speak to over the summer. And we've got loads of journalist guests coming up and specials and fun ideas. We've got the lads to do some brainstorming about things they'd like to chat about over the summer. So we've got so much to do. And then, of course, when pre-season rolls around, which won't be too long, there'll be games to talk about there as well. So yeah, every day, and even sometimes twice a day if a big story drops, we'll jump on and we'll react quickly to Sunderland signing Ousmane Dembele and Leo Messi coming in on a free.
Yes, because the rumour mill has definitely got going already, and it's not that long after the end of the season. But and the other thing as well, I was going to mention, talking about lists, Martin's got one hell of a list for the Roker Rewind section, the weekly podcast that's going to go out, and there's plenty of ideas on that list that I think will probably last a lifetime. But anyway, we need to get into the 2025-26 season. As I said, we'll do it over a couple of parts, so we'll get halfway through the season today up to the new year with a bit of luck, depending on how much these two gas on about this fantastic season, about the first half of the season. Yeah, these two. I'd like to think I'm fairly quick in between you two gassing on for 10 minutes. But anyway, we'll get into it because we'll start with the summer. And I'll come to you, Martin, on that summer, because it was probably, I can't think of many that really could rival it. And me being me, my mind goes back to the Terry Butcher summer, but that was basically just because it was so kind of out there, considering we'd signed virtually nobody for years and years and years in the summer. But that was out of the blue. The Roy Keane one, potentially, where everybody came in at the last minute. There was uncertainty, Niall Quinn, takeovers, all that sort of stuff. But where did that rank in the summers, the pre-seasons of Sunderland history? Because, like I said, I can't remember too many that were as eventful as this one.
I don't think we've ever had a summer like it, to be honest, Chris. I think it was a really interesting summer because we didn't know what to expect, did we? If you look back and cast your mind back to, in inverted commas, the model that we'd all been led to believe that we had, and obviously we did have, and it served us very well. We didn't know what the next step of that model looked like. We didn't know what that looked like going up to the Premier League. For the past few years, we'd had, buying young players in, paying a bit of money for young players, all the players on frees, but we hadn't really spent money on anybody over 24, did we? We had the scenario, and I think you and I were talking about the other day, in terms of when we went up, all the conversation was, okay, how many players do we need to supplement this squad? And the general consensus was we probably needed 4 or 5 players to come in and be good additions to that team. But we were talking about, how would Dennis Serkin make the step up? How would Dan Neil make the step up? How would Anthony Patterson make the step up? And how Mayenda would make the step up. And this is though, some of those players have stayed, others have subsequently departed. I don't think any of us truly got the magnitude of the ambition behind the scenes ahead of this summer. I don't think any of us in our wildest dreams, a few days after the playoff final, would have said that we would be signing the caliber of players that we signed and spending the amount of money that we signed and that we spent. And in hindsight, you kind of go, well, it was a sensible thing to do, it was a smart thing to do, it was the obvious thing to do. But none of us were really saying that at the time. If you look back at what our ambitions were and what we thought would be a mark of success going into the season, we all thought that, given avoiding relegation, a really red hot crack, and being in, going in the last games of the season with something to play for, and that would have been staying up, we all thought that would have been par for the course if we were doing all right. We all thought that would be okay. Gav, I remember that podcast you did with a Leeds fan and a Burnley fan before the season started. And, each respective fan was a little bit more confident about their team because their club, because they knew what had been going on. They knew the kind of direction that they were taking. But I don't think anybody would have listened and go, oh, 2 of those teams are definitely going to stay up by a good distance. And I think, in English football, you've had this notion that the 3 clubs that go up are going to really struggle. And I think a lot of clubs buy into that and think this is going to be a struggle this season, so we'll get the money, we'll get the cash, we'll go back down with some parachute payments, and we'll rebuild and try again. You look what Burnley do. They just go up. They don't really make a fist of staying up. They take the parachute payments, they'll go back down. As a club, they're probably financially okay, but it's no fun to watch for supporters. The novelty of being in the Premier League soon wears off after you get bloody stuffed every week. So the way that we actually approached the summer, I think, was really, really, really interesting. The sorts of players we were going after was really interesting. Of course, you've got to get players through the door. You've got to get people to say yes. The big thing that happened before many of the transfers happened, if any of them, was Florian Gisolfi arriving. And I think that really put a mark in the sand in terms of what our ambitions were and where our heads were at in terms of what this next season should be like. Obviously, Bellingham had left and we had that transfer saga kind of immediately after the playoff final, and it got resolved relatively quickly, and we got some good money for him. And, another parallel universe, him staying and competing for a first team place would have been really interesting this season. I'm not sure how he would have fitted in. But, you got that cash there, which helps things. But if you cast your mind all the way back, that appointment of Gisolfi made us all go, oh, shit, we're serious about this. And I think that was the catalyst for everything else that happened over that summer.
Yeah. I think it was, I think it was 14 or maybe 15 players in total when you include Mark Guiu and Gertrude coming in on loan as well, Gav. And as Martin said, the catalysts for ins and outs were Joe Bellingham leaving and Enzo Lefebvre signing as soon as Luke O'Nien asked him on that podium at Wembley. But I think the surprise for me, Gav, and the big kind of signal to me was, and Martin kind of went through a little bit of it there, was when we were looking at our team from last season, and then we were suddenly signing a quality left back from Atletico Madrid, and I was going, oh, hang on, well, what does that mean for Dennis Sergen? And then we were really going after a goalkeeper, which I didn't see coming when that final whistle went at Wembley. And then I thought, hang on, we're going to replace Patterson here. And I just realised, actually, but one by one, we were seemingly replacing these players who we were all hanging our hat on going up to the Premier League.
Yeah, and I think Martin touched on it there, but it was probably the arrival of Gasolfi that really set it all up, because he turned down, by all accounts, had turned down Juventus and Newcastle, hadn't he? Or roles with those clubs. And we had really sold him the project, leaving Roma, which are obviously a massive club. You think, well, what is it about Sunderland that he went, yep, I want to be a part of that? And it was obviously to have the remit to work with so much, plenty of resources, and also go for a level of player that maybe other clubs aren't prepared to gamble on. And I think the signing of Xhaka was obviously huge, but then some of the young players that we went in for, I heard an interview not long ago with Dave Jones, formerly of our former non-executive director, and he'd said that when we signed Noah Siddiqui, people at Brentford were asking him, how the hell did you get him for that price? So there was something about what we were doing and what we were saying to people over the summer that was making us the most attractive option. And when I sit here right now, Sunderland 7th in the table, qualify for Europe, fantastic season. Yeah, I can understand why we were attractive, but in the summer we weren't really that attractive. We were, the most unfancied team in the league, who'd finished 4th in the championship and won the playoffs. So it wasn't like we were, going to players and saying, look at this massive ambitious project that we've got. And people would just say, yeah, definitely, I want to be a part of that. There were obviously other little strands to it, and, we might uncover more of that as we go on. But I think the most important thing was that appointment of Gasolfi, and then the signing of Granit Xhaka. I think everything kind of spanned from there. I think it says a lot about the ambition of the club and the way we wanted to go. And, the other thing I was just thinking about there when you were talking is we've got a very young owner and we've got very young people in the club. And with that comes ambition, right? I mean, if you're in your 20s and you own a football club, you want it to be the best club in the land as quickly as possible, don't you? You're not like a wily old businessman who's like thinking, oh, maybe we should be careful this year. And, I presume that's why the Louis Dreyfus family have surrounded Kirill with people who've already worked with the family and different businesses and ventures and football clubs to try and keep his head steady. But yet, I still think with him being the man at the top, him being the chief decision maker and being very young, I think it was always probably going to be the case that he was going to be very, very ambitious in some way. The bit I didn't expect was just how ruthless would be, because like you, I thought Patterson and Neil and players like this would all get a chance in the Premier League. But I wasn't complaining when I was seeing the level of player we were bringing in. I was, as much as I appreciate what those lads did for us, I think sometimes you've just got to look at what's happening in front of you and think, yeah, this is the way to do it. And as it's shown, we've signed some unbelievable players who've got better and better as the years gone on. And none of those players who we dumped basically can have any complaints, and I'm sure they wouldn't, because the results of what then happened are there for all to see.
And it's interesting when you look back through those signings during the summer, because it's easy to kind of lump them all in together, isn't it? But Xhaka didn't sign until the 30th of July. So he only arrived for 2 or 3 weeks before the season actually started. And we'd done an awful lot of transfer business before that. And I think the common comment that we got during the summer when you lads were in the main talking to fans of opposition clubs or journals who'd watched players who we were bringing in, was that they thought these players had the potential to play in the Premier League, but maybe it was a year too soon. They maybe expected them to stay where they were for another year before going to the Premier League. And I think the combination of that, getting the opportunity to play in the Premier League maybe a year ahead of schedule, plus the AFCON year, which meant that we were going to lose those players, or a lot of those players, for 5, 6, 7 weeks, or whatever it was in December, January. That probably kind of gives you a little insight into how we got those players ahead of other clubs. There were obviously other clubs interested in them, but the fact that we were prepared to go and put the money down, we did a lot of business early. And again, another comment was, I think you might have paid a couple of £1 million too much for him. Well, maybe you could have dragged it out for another 6 weeks and got him a couple of £1 million cheaper. But we were getting these players in, we were showing that we wanted them, getting them into the club early, and getting them on the field with the rest of the squad and with Lebris. And the fact that he got so many players together in a system and in a formation where everyone knew the jobs for the opening game of the season was superb. You've got the impact then of the Xhaka signs. You've got all these signs that happened before Xhaka, and then after Xhaka, you had the likes of Mukiele arriving, Robbie, who turned us down previously that summer, changed his mind because we got off to a half-decent start. He joined. Crowder comes in. So you've got, it's almost pre-Xhaka signings and post-Xhaka signings in some respects, because I think the arrival of Xhaka really made people sit up and take notice, and they go, Jesus Christ, if he's going there, then there must be something in it. And maybe a conversation that had happened earlier in the summer, it gets a little bit more credibility, and people pay a bit more credence because of that arrival. So I think you can kind of look at the transfer window almost in two phases. It's that pre and post Granit Xhaka, and it's the vast majority of the signs we brought in worked out.
Just on that point you made there about paying a little bit more to get who we wanted, that's what happened with Xhaka, if you remember. We did go back and forth with his club for a bit, and the stories at the time were all, Sunderland are only prepared to pay 15, but Leverkusen won 20 or whatever. But he was being linked with other clubs. I think he was linked with the Saudi club as well, wasn't he? And
AC Milan, he was linked with
AC
the
Milan
club. He was linked all over the place, yeah.
Yeah. And we've heard this from Xhaka subsequently, but he said that his phone rang in the middle of the night and it was Kirill saying, I want you. And he made the big play and he just said, I don't care what they want, I'll pay it. And to me, that can one view be viewed as a little bit reckless, but also he just wanted to get the job done. And we talk about this regime being ruthless. It's pretty ruthless as well. It's just like, we're just going to pay it. We want Granit Xhaka. What does it cost? There we go. He's in the door. And we did that with several signings over the summer. And like I say, I know our transfer strategy generally, particularly when Speakman was at the club, has been to be quite patient and wait for the right moments to strike and things like that. But this was a bit of a change of tact. I thought we actually were quite aggressive. And you mentioned before Xhaka coming in, I think we had 5 or 6 players through the door already. And I remember the start of pre-season, as we're about to get into, we played South Shield and we had a number of new players on the pitch, and then we went abroad and played games against Sevilla and Sporting Lisbon where we had new players involved, and that's not typically been something that Sunderland have done since we dropped into League One in the years that have followed. We've kind of took our time with signing players, and people can get a little bit frustrated with that, but obviously because, we've been in the playoff final, your season's extended, which eats into pre-season. We had to get started as quick as possible. We couldn't afford to wait to get players in, because then you end up like Burnley, really. Like Burnley weren't particularly aggressive in the summer, and they ended up not signing anybody really of any note. And that could have been us. I'm just glad we were particularly aggressive.
But it's that thing as well, is the work that goes on the year or two beforehand. So when Burnley went up, they had commitments to buy a number of players they'd had on loan the previous season who potentially weren't good enough to step into the Premier League. And, Leeds had carried wages and transfer fees and all that sort of stuff as well. And, people had, I probably moaned as well on occasion about us not spending money in the Championship. But once you saw last summer play out, you understood completely what had gone on over the past, 3 seasons or 4 seasons, didn't you? Because you could see the logic and the sense in getting promoted, in inverted commas, on the cheap, building young players up to then sell on a huge profit, like we did with Jack Clark, like we did with Joe Bellingham. And then you got that money, once you get into the Premier League, that's where the money makes the biggest difference. Because it's almost easy easier if you want to splash some cash in the Championship, but it's not the only way to get out of that league. In the Premier League, you can't do that. You've got to invest. You've got to spend money. And I think it was kind of like the fog kind of lifted for some people, didn't, in terms of what had been going on for the past 2 or 3, 4 seasons once we got to last summer.
And obviously you were talking about Burnley. And if we'd signed the likes of Fleming from the Championship, I mean, I would have been thinking, oh, we're in trouble. We're kind of in for a tough, hard season here. Because he's a Championship player and Burnley splashed out on him. And you were looking at the players, the background we were signing. And even though it wasn't a huge amount more than Burnley, you just saw the difference in level of players we were signing, Gav.
Well, and then when they were panicking towards the end of August, they ended up spunking an absolute fortune on Armand Broja from Chelsea, and was it Ugochukwu as well from Chelsea? They did end up spending a lot of money, but on crap players, and that again, it just points to a lack of strategy. We went in. It was amazing, really, when you consider that we had less time than Burnley and Leeds to get ready for the summer. Just how much better our plan was for everything. And it's hats off to those at the top of the club, really.
Yeah, well, the fact that Martin touched on it, by the 4th of July, we'd confirmed the signing of Enzo Lafay for around 20 million, Habib Diarra for 30 million, and Noah Siddiqui for just under 20 million had all arrived by the 4th of July. But anyway, we need to get into pre-season because we've already had Gav trying to hoodwink us into thinking that he actually remembers the South Shields game because he had a few sherbets that day. And then we did go to Seville, or we did play Seville, and we ended up playing Hearts in Craig Gordon's testimonial, and we had a fantastic interview with Craig Gordon on our podcast in the lead up to that, and we were truly awful that day. I remember pretty sure it was Johnny and Bomber on the podcast after that game, and it was one of the most depressing pods I think we've had on How the podcast since we started way back last March, April time. And then the two that gave us the hints at what was going to happen. There was 2 friendlies in 2 days. There was one a bit against Augsburg and one against Rayo Vallecano. And Augsburg was the day before, and we seemingly played our first choice 11 in that game. And then the day after, we played what looked like our second choice with Alan Brown on the wing and Enzo Lafay in the middle of the park, which gave us clues at what would happen on the opening day of the season against West Ham. But as Martin said as well, in the lead up to that game, we also made two signings. So, we made the signing of Omar Alderete in the days before, and Michele signed the day after West Ham. But getting into the West Ham game, in the starting 11, we had 7 players making their debut in that game. But Gav, I just wanted to come to you because, going down over all of these moments that's happened over all of these, since, let's say, the last 12 to 18 months, whatever it's been, however far you want to go back. A lot of people will talk about the goals, will talk about the games against our nearest and dearest. But I thought the symbolism of the team coming out against West Ham, Gav, at the Stadium of Light back in the Premier League after those 4 years in League One was probably something that was as emotional as anything else we've experienced in this last 12 months.
Yeah, we've had several of these games over the last couple of years where they felt like landmark moments, big occasions, and obviously the Chelsea game, which we ended the season with. There was the Coventry playoff game, and then this, where the fan base treated like a big occasion, and sorry, the home derby against the visitors, where the fans treated like a massive occasion, and you just felt like we couldn't lose. Like, it wasn't just a normal game. It was our return to the Premier League with so many new players. It was a lovely sunny day. There was the big tifo which dropped from the roof, full stadium display, people welcoming in the bus and things like that, which made it feel like a big game. And it was almost us announcing ourselves back to the world, really. Like, I think a lot of people had, because we dropped out of the Premier League, had just forgotten about Sunderland. Unless you'd watched Sunderland Till I Die, Like, oh yeah, forgot about them. Yeah, they were crap for a few years, weren't they? But globally, we kind of had been forgotten about. And I suppose you could make an argument that even throughout the season, we've been a little bit ignored by the sort of the wider football and fraternity, because a lot of the good stuff we've done hasn't been particularly well recognised. But hey, by the by, this game was the symbolisation of just us being back, really. I felt so connected in the ground, and that's a big Reggie Slippery buzzword, isn't it? But we were everything felt so well connected in the ground. It was a really special day where, for 30 minutes or so, because this was the part that I wasn't sure about getting promoted. All we talked about over the summer is the difference between the Premier League and the Championship is massive. The pace of the game and everything is so different. And for half an hour, West Ham zipped it about, and I was like, friggin' hell. Like, I'm not used to this. We were getting passed off the park. Bowen was slicing us to bits down the wing. And once we adjusted after that sort of half an hour, we actually were all right. I think they had a really big chance, didn't they, early on? And I feel like it was Ballard blocked it, and we kind of
Ballard cleared one off the line, and
Yeah.
Luke saved one from Bowen really early on.
That was it. Yeah, so we kind of rode through that sticky spell, and then we grew in belief after half time. And when I look at the team that we had out on the pitch, a lot of those players were big players for us this season. But Jensen Seelt starting the game, and Mayenda playing up front, Adingra playing on the left. The bench was very inexperienced, if we're honest. So this wasn't like we weren't the finished article. We hadn't quite finished building our team yet. And that's something I complained about at the time. I was like, they need to get these transfer windows shut before the season starts. Although we wouldn't have signed Brian Brobby if that had happened. So, swings and roundabouts. But yeah, it was just a great day to be a fan. You know what it's like when you're in the stadium and the sun's shining and everything. Everyone's been over the town, had a good drink, and everyone's in the party mood, and it just felt like a continuation of the really good way we ended the season, and that was important. I think I remember talking about that at the time, about how the momentum had carried us from one season into the other. And yeah, we ended up blowing West Ham away. I mean, it's probably the best opening day I can think of in my memory ever.
Yeah, well, I told you these two could gas, because we're halfway through the first part, and we haven't even finished covering the first game of the season yet. So I think that's a good time for us to take a quick break, and we'll be back very soon.
For the moments that matter, choose Curad Naturals. Infused with aloe vera and vitamin E, Curad Naturals bandages protect your unexpected scrapes, cuts, and burns while also moisturizing your skin. Find deeper relief with natural ingredients you can trust to start the healing. When life's surprises call for the best, choose Curad, a deeper level of care. Shop the full collection on Amazon or visit curad.com to learn more.
And welcome back to How We're the Podcast. And we're just about to cover the first game of the season properly as well, for halfway through the first part of our big fat season review of 2025-26. And Martin, I think there's two players in here which we can just look at, because one we might not mention again, but in terms of where players' fortunes go and sliding doors moments, talking about the start of the season and where they end up. Two players, Jensen Seelt, who had a fantastic pre-season, and we were all quite excited about going into the season thinking this could be his season to really, really kick on after his previous injury troubles. And Enzo Lafay, who seemingly was in the reserves in those two friendlies and was only on the bench for this game. He was behind Adingra and Talby at the time, which is surprising, of course, looking back. But looking at the fortunes of those two players, it is interesting when, two players start off complete opposites at ends. One's looking forward to it in the team, and at the end of the season, they've both had, complete opposites in terms of how their season's gone.
Yeah, no, look, Silt was an interesting one. I don't think any of us really thought he was going to be a regular feature for us this season. It was down timing of players coming in more than anything else, and obviously the injury to Luke O'Nien had ruled him out at the start of the season as well. So he was kind of drafted in as a bit of an emergency towards the tail end of pre-season, and obviously started this game, did relatively well, but he had Omar Alderete on the bench, didn't he, who only just signed. He came on, set up the first goal, didn't he? So that was a great way for a centre-half to announce his arrival by swinging in a beautiful cross. I think he'd already done a Cruyff turn, hadn't he, at that point? So he'd announced himself pretty well.
What a ball that
The-
was, by the way. You've just reminded me of that. That was some
superb.
ball in.
Superb. The Enzo Lefebvre one, and look, I think you can pick through Simon Adingra and Talby and other players, and Mayenda, who've all had a chance or something approaching a chance to varying degrees, and they've either grabbed us or not. And I think we'll come on to a game shortly where I think it probably made Labrissa's mind up about Mayenda pretty early on in the season. But the Lefebvre thing puzzled me at the time, and it still puzzles me when I look back on it. Because this is a lad who Labrissa's known for forever. He gets brought in the Championship, plays a massively important... we don't go up if he isn't there. He takes a corner against Coventry, he puts the ball through in the playoffs. He is the difference maker. He is why we're in the Premier League, if you're going to boil it down. And then it's almost like an insult, isn't it? Or it's putting somebody in the place by including him in that, in inverted commas, reserve team the day after that first team friendly. And I just can't fathom that still now. There was rumours swirling, wasn't there? He was going to leave. He wasn't happy. He'd put a transfer request in off the back of that. And look, who knows what was going on behind the scenes? Who knows if Enzo needed a bit of a kick up the arse and just get his head right for the start of the season or what? But
could it not have just been that he trusts Lefebvre and knows his character, and he was like, I know how he's going to react here, if I do that, as opposed to because we brought in a couple of new wingers and he maybe just wanted to integrate them as quickly as possible, and he knew, I can depend on Enzo. I know his mentality. I know the way. I know him as a person. Maybe it could have been that. I don't know.
If you look at Labris, right, and we know he's relatively risk averse, and he likes to go in to games with players he can abundantly trust, right? He knows what he's going to get out of Lefebvre every single game. You've got a midfield there. Obviously, Granit Xhaka's in the midfield for West Ham. Then you've got Simon Adingra, who has blown hot and cold in the Premier League for Brighton beforehand, and you don't really know what you're going to get with him. Then you've got Siddiqui, Diarra, and Talby, who've never played in English football, never mind the Premier League before. And he doesn't know them. He's never worked with them until the summer. So it really did baffle me why he left Lefebvre on the bench in those early stages. But look, obviously, we know how Lefebvre battled his way back in the team, got his position, and kind of that was that. And he's been right up there in terms of player of the season for us, as it turns out. But it was a strange one. I still don't quite get it.
Yeah, and the decision to put Mayenda up front over Isidore, because obviously Mayenda got that goal at Wembley, and he carried on that goal scoring form into the opening day of the season when he opened the scoring after an hour, and then Dan Ballard and Wilson Isidore got the other two to make it 3-0 because Graham Potter's West Ham folded like a pack of cards that day, and then went on to have a pretty disastrous season going down on the last day of the season, of course. But it was nice to see that the three players who scored that day, and that was probably the biggest story that day, Gav, that actually, because 7 players made their full debuts in the starting 11, 1 came on bench. Omar Alderete came on when Jensen Seelt went off. So there was only really Mayenda, Ballard and Hume left, and then Isidore came on as sub for Mayenda. And all 3 goal scorers were players who played for us in the Championship.
Yeah, it was a reminder of the quality that we brought up with us. And again, you can't write it, but it's very well timed, isn't it? Because when you're bringing in all these players, everyone's thinking, everyone's going to be shifted out. And it was just a reminder to everyone that we did have some good players carrying in from the previous season. When you think about the goals as well, the Mayenda one, that was a very difficult header, Mayenda's header. He's very little backlift. The ball in by Alderete is fantastic, but it's not like he's 5 yards out and it's been whipped in. He's had to arch back and head it over the goalkeeper. And let's be fair as well. The West Ham keeper that day, he was appalling, wasn't
awful, wasn't he?
They paid like 30 million for him from Leicester, didn't they? And he was just awful. I don't think he got back in that team till towards the end of the season. The Ballard one was a typical Dan Ballard, what you would associate with Ballard anyways. He just leapt like a salmon, got into the end of a Dingra's cross, bangs into the back of the net. And then the third from Isidore was, again, crap goalkeeping, I thought, but still a great finish. But, it was nice to see the lads who we'd had the season before getting involved and being a big part of the start of our new journey. Because, I think there would have been doubt in their minds, wouldn't there? Probably seeing so many of their teammates being moved on. There'll have been doubt in their minds thinking, am I going to play much this season? Am I going to be shifted on? And, the manager has faith in these players and he stuck by them for the game and paid off.
Yeah. Just very, very quickly, Gav, you talked about that Ballard header. I don't think we saw that enough throughout the season.
Aye, it was a hell of a goal, wasn't it? He didn't do it enough. Yeah, fair enough. I think actually when you look throughout the season, we were pretty naff from set pieces. If I was gonna start picking at things that I wish we'd done better, we started really well from set plays, it felt like, and then just tailed off dramatically to the point where when we were getting corners towards the end of the season, I was just like, we're not going to score from you. Which, when you see the size of some of the players we've got, we should be scoring more from corners. So yeah, I would probably agree with that, Chris. There was a point, wasn't there, where I think it was, might have been after the Man U game, which we'll obviously come on to eventually, but Ballard was probably one of the best defenders in the league at that point. And he was a threat from set plays. He was even in our box, defending them was unbelievable. And you think the sort of profile of player he is, that he should probably have got between 5 and 7 goals just from set plays alone.
Yeah. Well, look, after that high of that opening day of the season, 3 points and a 3-0 win over West Ham United, fantastic day in the sun. We then go to Burnley the week after, Martin, and we're brought well and truly back down to earth. There was a couple of points I want to raise in this game because he went with Mayenda up top again. And in the first half, Mayenda had a miss. I think it was like 6 yards out, came across. I think that he didn't quite get the flight of the ball, or he came too quickly to him. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. And then Burnley kind of gave us a sucker punch just after half time, I think, when we completely lost concentration. And it was one of them where you thought you were then unsure how much West Ham was the norm or how much Burnley was the norm. And everyone was thinking, well, we go away to Burnley and Burnley get 3 points. We still don't know where the season's going to go.
No, that's right. I think, we talked all season, didn't we, about moments in games, and the vast majority of our games this season have been decided really by moments either way, haven't they? This Burnley game, when the fixtures came out, you had all these people going, it's a bloody easy start of the season for Sunderland. It's only easy if you win those games. If you don't pick up points in those games, you're left with a run of games against the clubs up at the top end of the league, and you're fighting for your life. And the last thing you want as any club in the Premier League is to play a newly promoted club for your first away game. West Ham would not have wanted to come to Sunderland for that opening day of the season. I think it showed. And I don't think we would much rather have gotten to Burnley in March or February, wouldn't we? Rather than going in August. Their first home game back after getting promoted, and look, they were all up for it, right? When you look back on that game, people said, it's an awful performance and all this sort of stuff, brought us back down to earth. The result absolutely brought us back down to earth. But performance-wise, it's very similar to a lot of games that we actually played. You talk about that Mayenda chance, you very easily sixes away. You look at the one that Bobby had against Chelsea in the last game of the season where he scuffs it, but goes off a defender and it goes in. And it's just on that game against Burnley, our luck wasn't in. Mayenda didn't connect properly with it, but it was still a good shot on target. I think in that move, Dan Ballard got injured, and Ballard won the header, and Ballard got injured and he had to go off. Shortly after that miss, Talby went through and just passed one just past the post. So we could have easily been 2-0 up after 20 minutes with a couple of inches either way. Of course, they get us a sucker punch just after half time, which makes us need to go and attack and try to get that equaliser. And we get caught out with another one just in, it was very late on in the game. I can't remember if it was injury time or just before full time, but it was late on in the game. We got caught out trying to attack and get the equaliser. And I think that sort of game happens against any club. I don't think it was necessarily Burnley were particularly better than us on the day. It was just the way the game played out. And I don't think there's ever been, probably with the exception when we played Burnley at home, I don't think we've ever truly outclassed a team for 9 minutes where there's looked a real gulf in quality. I think we've had to earn the vast majority of points that we've got. We've had to play well, take those moments that have cropped up, with the exception of that Burnley at home game. And this game against Burnley at Turf Moor was exactly the same as that. It was a tough game. It was a tight game. Could have gone either way. But it was that sort of result that you go, as you say, you go, oh, shit, maybe this isn't going to be as good as we thought. Because when you look after that West Ham game, you go, God, if we can go to Burnley and pick up 3 points there, you're going into, I think it's Brentford at home next, isn't it? And you get 6 points from those first 2 games, you go into another home game. We could have 3 wins out of 3 here. And all of a sudden you just get a bit of a reality check, which, I don't necessarily think it was the worst thing in the world for us to get, because he made a couple of changes in the team. And I think that kind of set the foundation for what happens after that.
Yeah. Well, just quickly, Gav, because in between that game against Burnley and that game against Brentford, we take on Lyndon Gooch's Huddersfield Town in the League Cup. So just very good. I mean, we end up drawn 1-1. Mark Guiu got a late equaliser for us, and it ended up going to penalties. They won 6-5. You look at our team that day: Patterson, Huggins, Harrison Jones, Dan Neil, Masuaku and Mukele made their debuts. Chris Rigg, Enzo Lefebvre, who needed game time, Mark Guiu, who hadn't getting many minutes at that point, Isidore as well, Patrick Roberts. How much of that was a blessing in disguise getting knocked out of the League Cup? Was this a good thing, or do you think it was always good to get players minutes and carry on with Wigan signed in the League Cup?
Well, I personally would have preferred if we'd had a good cup run, and yeah, I understand why the team was weakened, but I was there that night and it was rubbish. It was absolutely rubbish. I did get to see Mark Guiu score his only Sunderland goal though, and Arthur Masuaku at centre half.
So far.
Hi. And Arthur Masuaku playing centre half. He actually played really well. Him and Nordy played centre half. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't one for the ages really. I don't think we'll remember this game at all in a year or two. I think if I hadn't forensically gone through this with you two, or about to go forensically through this, then I probably would have forgot about it. But yeah, I was there. I was one of the 20,000 odd people in attendance. Yeah, you could maybe say it was a blessing in disguise. Maybe having a bit of a more relaxed schedule helped us perhaps over the season. But I mean, to be honest, we had a chance of a good cup run in the FA Cup and we didn't take it, as we'll get on to. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lose any sleep over this one.
Wasn't Jensen Silt's penalty the highlight of this game, though? He just absolutely wellied
Oh.
it. You remember?
With no backlift, just one step, bang.
That was pretty much him done, wasn't it? 'Cause I think he left just after that. But that was goodbye and good night.
Yep, I think Arsenal could have done with him as part of their penalty takers against PSG. But interesting as well, just talking about the attendance, Gav, we had 22,249, which was about 1,000 and odd more than Burnley had for the league game against us a few days before. They had 21,285. But I'll stick with you, Gav, in the Brentford game in the next league game a few days later, because we're back at home. We've just been beaten off Burnley. Martin touched on how important it was, and Lebris started shaking his team up a little bit because Adingra dropped to the bench and Lefebvre came in. I'm just looking back at my notes for the game back then, and I was actually putting question marks saying whether that was a surprise to ask people on the pod after the game, whether people were shocked by Lefebvre coming in, but he ended up being man of the match. But 0-0 at half time, we ended up going behind as well, and we'll get on to Ronaldo in a couple of games' time, because I think this is the time when he started pulling people over into the box, and he was just getting used to the Premier League and what he could and couldn't get away with at this point. But once Roofs saved the penalty, and it was a simple save down to his right hand side. But we did end up
penalty, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I'm sure.
But we did end up going behind Gav 15 minutes from time. And at this point, we've just been beaten off Burnley. And then our second home game of the season, we go behind with 15 minutes left. Again, talking about sliding doors moments, we lose 2 off the bounce at the minute, the momentum starts going the wrong way, doesn't it?
Yeah, and didn't they have a goal ruled out for
in the first half
as well?
First half,
so
just offside.
So we had a bit of good fortune, I guess, with that. But yeah, I think again, I remember saying this quite often. The games, particularly early in the season at home, all felt like events. I mean, the weather was it was last weekend in August, so the weather was still good. And again, even though we went behind, we built up this belief from being in the Championship where we just didn't give up till the end was a mantra that we live by. And at no point, even at 1-0 down, did I feel like we were out of the game. I mean, we get the penalty not long after that, don't we? Through Lafay. And you mentioned Enzo. He came in on the left-hand side and he was unbelievable in this game, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
He was absolutely excellent. By this time, he played in that Huddersfield game. And I think he played centrally, actually, and didn't really do much, but it wasn't the point, really. He came back in for this game on the left. He'd moved Talby over to the right-hand side, which is where Talby played again on the right-hand side, which he kind of started the season in that position. I know he went back there a few times throughout the season, but I think we all prefer him probably on the left. But regardless, it was kind of trying to get players into the team. Enzo came in on the left, and we just were never out of the game. We were never out of the game, and we responded quickly, as we seem to do more often than not. We get that penalty, and then the momentum's in our favour, isn't it? At that point, you won all. You're the home team. The crowd are behind you. They know that this team have a habit of scoring late goals, and it was probably a goal again we probably didn't see enough of over the season, Chris, that we scored to win it. One, Granit Xhaka firing balls at the box. Xhaka got loads of assists earlier in the season, but I didn't really see him swinging crosses in that often. And Isidore getting in front of his man to win a header. I don't think I've seen Isidore do that since, really. But it was just a really good goal and a fantastic way to win a game. I mean, unbelievable way to win a game. And Brentford, when you consider, because I remember at that point, and we were all probably thinking the same, Brentford we thought were going to struggle badly over the season. And Thiago, who got their goal, nobody really knew who this guy was. As it turned out, he ended up being one of the best goal scorers in the league, and he's been called up by Brazil for the World Cup, hasn't he? But at that point, I think we were looking at this and going, that's a game we should win. I think as you look at the way the season went on after that point, what we did do there was we beat a very good side, because Brentford had a really good season considering the amount of players that they did lose. So this was a landmark result for me, and the way it's just become such a hallmark of the way we do things, winning late in games. I mean, unbelievable once again from the lads.
Yeah, it was 96th minute, I think, was Isidore's winner. And I think Lafay got that penalty, second goal for Sunderland, that penalty with about 10 minutes to go.
It was virtually the last kick, wasn't it? The goal?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
The Isidore goal was, yeah.
Yeah, virtually the last kick of the game again, sliding doors moments. And like I said, Lafay's second goal for Sunderland that day definitely didn't Panenka it that day, which we might mention at some point in this review of the season. But then after Brentford, we go to Palace away, Martin, and this is a tough call at this time, because Palace, on the back of winning the cup, winning the Charity Shield, and they're renowned for being great going forward, and to go here and play as we did, and I remember people like Brian Brobby coming on in this game and Geertruida coming on to both make their debuts in this game when it's 0-0, it's tight. Both of these players are coming on, and I just thought this set the tone. I think this was the blueprint for us playing away for the rest of the season, Martin.
Well, it wasn't. Look, we'd had the opening 3 games and we had the international break, haven't we? So this was a fortnight after that Brentford game. We'd also had the transfer window. So as you said, Crowder and Robbie had come in. But the likes of Mark Gay had gone back to Chelsea, which of course triggered the interest or the re-interest in Robbie. The likes of Patrick Roberts has left as well. Roberts was on the bench against Brentford and he departed for Birmingham after that game. And this was another one where you're kind of going, this is going to be a massive test, because all the talk was how long Palace were unbeaten for, which stretched, was it right back to April or March or something like that? It had an incredible run. And we're going, right, okay, we've got through that little opening period of the league. This is going to be a big test now. The FA Cup winners, really on great form. Glaston's done a fantastic job there. And again, you go in with a really determined, gritty performance. And I suspect if the Burnley result doesn't happen, we maybe don't go in with as much defensive solidity. We might be a little bit more open if we don't have that Burnley game. But I think he's learned a lesson from Burnley, and we just look solid. We just are fighting for every ball. I think Roofs has a marvelous game. I think did they have a goal disallowed? Or there was one very early on where he was flagged offside and he went through or something. They had a chance. Maybe he went through and he should have scored. Maybe he wasn't offside, but he went through and he put it past the post and he should have scored. But they, once we again got into the game, it was a real battle, and we showed that character, which became synonymous with Sunderland throughout the course of the season, where we just fight and battle and defend with our lives and chuck our bodies on the line to block shots and all that sort of stuff. And we came out with a deserved point at the end of it, which again, in the context of the season with those 2 home wins, getting a point away at Crystal Palace, so give you 7 points out of the first 4 games. It's a bloody good start.
Yeah, just quickly, Martin, on this game, because you mentioned Robin Roofs. He'd obviously saved the penalty. He'd made a couple of good saves at West Ham. But I think this Palace game was where he really introduced himself and everyone thought we've got a really good keeper on our hands at this point.
Well, you're looking at him, aren't you, and going, well, what does he do? And I think immediately, even in pre-season, that game he played, he'd saved a penalty in Germany, hadn't he? And he's coming out for crosses, claiming crosses, getting the ball out, from throwing the ball, distributing it well. You can see the saves he's sort of making. He's obviously saved the penalty against Brentford as well. Very early on, we talked about that chance that Jared Bowen had for West Ham. 2 minutes into the game, Roofs makes a really smart save down to his left. And you just keep looking for signs with him, because he came in as a real unknown, didn't he? We were linked with other goalkeepers before he signed, and it seemed like a little bit of a punt. I remember the questions that Lebris was getting asked at the start of the season when Roofs was brought in. He said, "Who's going to be first choice? Is Roofs going to be first choice, or will he be competing with Patterson?" And Lebris was very clear. He said, "Robin Roofs is my first choice goalkeeper." He said it straight away. This was a game where you kind of go, aye, he's good. Because we'd seen all of the signs. He hadn't had a great deal to do in some of the other games. This game, he had a lot to do. He was put under incredible pressure. And he stood up to it. He coped with it well. And you often wonder with goalkeepers coming from other European sides, because the physicality isn't the same as it is in the Premier League. And you're playing against the likes of Mateta and people like that. The ball's getting swung in. And he stood up to it so well. And that was the game he kind of go, yeah, he's good. He'll do.
Yeah, he'll do. Just keeping Palace out and keeping them at bay for 90 minutes. But we're back at the Stadium of Light a week later, Gav, for our first Sunday game of the season. And it was eventful. Aston Villa came to town, and it was, I mentioned Ronaldo getting away with, giving a penalty away and potentially getting away with another against Brentford. And we saw, him kind of dragging players down. And maybe we were talking about Lebris having a word with him because he wasn't necessarily getting away with it. And then in this one, he lashed out. I think it was Matty Cash.
Yeah.
They had a bit of a tussle after the half-hour mark. He got sent off. And after that point, Chris Rigg, I think, was sacrificed about 5 minutes later on his full Premier League debut. starting the first time that's this season. And after that, it was a bit of a Labris masterclass, wasn't it?
I felt so sorry for Rig as well because he'd started the game really well, and then had to be hooked, and it wasn't for anything he'd done wrong. Ronaldo was ridiculous in that challenge. Really, I know it was a late tackle on him, but then kick the guy straight between the legs and the bollocks. I mean, what were you expecting? You know, and it was annoying because I know it was early in the game, but we'd started really well, and yet even with 10 men, we were the better team in my opinion. We were the better side. This was Villa. You know, Villa was still trying to get the grips with the season. They improved so much after this game. Actually, I think they went on a giant unbeaten run after they played us. But we were just defensively outstanding. Nordy Mukiele was unbelievable in this game. I don't think Watkins got a sniff off him. Him and Alderete at the back, but the team as a whole just grafted and grafted and grafted. And yeah, I mean, we didn't deserve to draw the. It's so stupid to say this because we had 10 men, and yet I just felt like we were the better side, and we went behind as well. And it was a great goal from Cash. He absolutely battered it, didn't he? Past Robin Roofs. But yeah, I mean, we get the equaliser with Isidore, and I think by the end of the game we were walking away going, we should have won that. Which I think again, when I mentioned before about Brentford was a game where we didn't quite know what to expect going into it, and they went on to have a great season. Well, Villa after this game, probably one of the best teams in the Premier League, and end up qualifying for the Champions League. And it shows you what level we were at, that we were able to compete with 10 men against a team with that much quality in it. You look at the side they had out on the pitch, it was largely the players that got them the European trophy in a Champions League finish. You know, Martinez, Digne, Cash, Konza, Mings, McGinn, Watkins, Rogers, Buendia. They all started this game. And yet, and I remember, because things weren't going their way, they then started bringing subs on, and they just signed Harvey Elliott. And everyone was talking about, oh God, what a signing that is for Villa, getting Harvey Elliott. And as it turned out, he'd been awful for them, hadn't he? But they brought like serious quality off the bench that cost a lot of money. Sancho and Daniel Malin, these were expensive players, yet Sunderland dealt with it magnificently. And also in this game, it was Ballard's return, wasn't it? I think from injury, because he was the one who was brought on for Rig. And Ballard had a great game as well. It was just a really pleasing performance, this one. I know it wasn't it doesn't necessarily jump off the page as like a big result or anything. Like when you look back in years to come, you're not going to go, that 1-1 draw with Villa wasn't, but it was probably one of the most pleasing performances of the season because it showed our resilience.
Yeah, it was a huge point, especially going down to 10 men, and Villa were just on the cusp of turning it around after their rough start of the season. But it meant we'd only lost once in the first 5 games. And I do remember actually late in the Villa game, Watkins had a fantastic chance at the back post that he maybe should have, but it was kind of out of the blue that, we were the kind of better side in the later stages, and Watkins had a header about 6 yards out that he should have done better with. So it could have gone very differently in that game. But it did mean we were 7th in the table after 5 games, Martin. But I'm just looking at the build up to the next game against Forest, Martin, and in the press conference, the Briss is getting questions about the bomb squad, with the likes of Dan Neil and Patterson and people like that. But the press, the questions are coming across already calling them the bomb squad. And he's responding by saying that they are training with the group and we need to take care of them. And they're waiting for, he already said that they're waiting for the next transfer window to find a new opportunity. He says it's not ideal, but that's football and we need to manage it. But this is only 5 games into the season, and it reminds you of the situation that he had to manage coming into this season. But yet we've only lost 1 game in the first 5, and he's bedding in all these new players at the same time as managing what the press are calling the bomb squad.
No, I think it's easy to overlook, isn't it? And it's easy to underestimate how difficult that actually is to balance, and how difficult it would be behind the scenes, well, with the players, because you've got all these new players coming in. But you've got the likes of Dan Neil, who were captain last season, who everyone thought would deserve a chance and should have a chance. You got Patterson, who made the tremendous save at Wembley, didn't he, to actually get us up? And it's interesting that they seem to have really quickly, and we talked earlier, didn't we, about how ruthless the club are, and Lebrisk can be really ruthless. I think Gisolfi is as well. This is a sign of that, because we've seen it before, haven't we, where we've stuck with players for too long. We've maybe given players chances that we kind of know that they're not up to, but we'll just see if they are anyway. Here, they decided there was absolutely no margin for error. There was no margin to find out whether a player is good enough or not. They decided whether players were good enough or not. And, like Dan Neil, I think they probably would have preferred to move him on during the summer. There was talk of it, wasn't there? And he ended up not getting moved. And it's interesting when you look at this squad around, around the first team, because on the bench against Forest, and I think it's for the first time this season, was Luke O'Nien. Now, would O'Nien have been considered as part of that bomb squad group at the time? I think probably he would have been, in terms of player personnel. I'm not talking about his influence off the field and all that sort of stuff. But O'Nien, as we know, has kind of subsequently forced his way back into the reckoning with some great performances when he's had the opportunity. Now, you look at the likes of Dan Neil and other players, Anthony Patterson, players in their positions got injured later on in the season, and whether they stuck around and waited for the chance and wanted to wait around for the chance or not, I don't know. But I think both of them would have got chances in the first team at various parts of the season. And you wonder, don't you, whether if they just stuck it out a little bit longer, because if Patterson's still here when Roofs gets injured, it's an even bigger call to bring Elborg into that team, isn't it? So it's interesting how it's all worked out. And I do think Dan Neil would have got a few games if he'd stuck around as well. But it's pretty clear. I'd kind of forgotten that how early they seem to have made the minds up until you reminded me there, Chris. But they do seem to have made the minds up pretty early that these lads had gone as far as they can and they wouldn't have a future with the club.
Again, it is really weird reading back through my notes at the time, where you think, really, did that happen? Did somebody actually say that? But it is interesting looking back, because going into that next game against Forest, Gav, again, Forest had a fantastic season, and we looked at our, people were at the time talking about our start to the season and saying, well, you haven't got any of the big guns, but Palace had a fantastic season. Villa had a good season. Forest were flying the season before, and we took them on early in this season as well. Went away from home to Nottingham Forest, 35% possession, which was a little bit of a feature at this point, because we had 30-odd% against West Ham as well. But went away from home, and again, another really tight game, and Alderete popped up with the goal for this one. And again, talking about set pieces, it was another free kick, I think, from Xhaka in this one. Great ball into the back post, and just before half time, which meant it was our first away goal of the season. But a feature of our time at this point, we're talking about how important Xhaka was throughout the season. Early on in this season, I'm again looking back through my notes, and I'm seeing against Palace and Forest, he was dropping in as almost that third centre half, that he almost had to drag us through those early periods where all these games were on a knife edge at some point, Gav, but we ended up coming out with points.
Yeah, we dug in this one, if I remember rightly. I remember Forest kind of by the end of the game chucking on every attacking player that they had just to try and force something to happen, and it just didn't. And I think it was probably around the time that they realised that it wasn't working with Postecoglou there.
That was his first game, wasn't it?
Yes, you're right. I'm talking after
they still might have realised that.
Yeah. They probably did quickly realise it after full time. But
yes, hang on, you were right. Yes, so Postecoglou comes in, but a lot of the players who became very important that season for Forest weren't in his team, and they came off the bench. I mean, Gibbs White had came on a half time in this game. Hutchinson, I remember coming on, and he was a real threat, but there They were trying to find Chris Wood, and Chris Wood he was absolutely nullified by Nordy Mukiele in this game. He was outstanding, Nordy, if I remember rightly, as was Alderete, as was Roofs. There was a chance late in the game, wasn't there, as well, where Wood flashes it past the post where he should have buried it.
Should have buried
Was it
it.
a header? So it wasn't like a particularly exciting game. It was a bit of a backs to the walls performance from us, but it was the type of away performance we became accustomed with, and we didn't score a lot of goals away from home in that probably the first 2/3 of the season. So to get that Alderete goal was a bit of a rare moment. But yeah, I think this was just an important 3 points when you consider the scale of the season, because Forest were down the bottom end struggling. Not at that point they weren't, but they were eventually. And these were big points away from home for us against teams who, at that point, even though we were sat after the game fourth in the table, at that point we probably thought we were going to be competing with the likes of Forest in terms of staying up. So I was over the moon with this one, and it was our first away win as well. So it was another landmark occasion, I guess. Sunderland winning away from home in the Premier League.
Yeah, just a couple of points on this game as well before we leave it behind. It did take us up to a Champions League place because it took us up to fourth in the table. The other thing was in injury time, Gertruida turned into Nedum Anua, if anyone can remember this, and he took on pretty much the whole Nottingham Forest side before a save by the goalkeeper. Unsurprisingly, Xhaka was man of the match in this game. Just very quickly as well, Gav, because Masuaku started this. I think it was his first start in the Premier League from memory. But I think we all realised he was a bit of a stopgap and brought in just to bulk the squad up at this point.
Yeah, I think if we're looking at the transfer business that we did last season, and hey, to get 14, 15 players through the door and only have 1 or 2 duds is really impressive, if we're honest. But yeah, he just didn't feel at any point like a Regis Labris player or a Sunderland player. I remember being told when he signed that when he came to do his photo shoot in the media room at the club, he just turned up with like a bin bag full of bits and like just kind of very nonchalantly walking into the ground. But he came in off the back of a couple of good years with Besiktas. I think he was voted the best left back in the league 2 years running. So he done okay in Turkey, but I remember him at West Ham and he wasn't. He was seen as a bit of a a joker really. And I remember the West Ham fans saying to us, we loved our. It was a bit like maybe a bit the way we think about Nosworthy, if we're being fair. It's a bit like that. They're a bit like, yeah, we love him, but he can be horrendous sometimes, and you just got to get on with it. I think with players like that, particularly at his age, he probably need to be playing football every week, and he wasn't going to get it here. Probably knew that, hence why he left so quickly. But he was hooked pretty early on in the game as well, wasn't he? He was, an hour in, he was brought off. Like I say, I watched him play centre half in that Huddersfield game, and he did okay there. And I remember thinking, no, I didn't realise he could play centre half. It was against Huddersfield in the cup though. But yeah, I just think with Arthur Masuaku, I think it was one of them signings we made where there wasn't a great deal of risk attached to it. He was a free. He was there if we needed him. Once Dennis Cirkin got himself fit, he wasn't needed anymore, and we let him go. And unfortunately, we had to use him in this game. Look, if Gertruida came in a little bit more fit and ready, maybe he would have fit into the team somewhere. And you mentioned earlier as well about O'Nien being back on the bench. Had O'Nien stayed fit, stayed fit and not got that really bad injury in the playoff final, he would have probably started a lot of these games at the start of the season, and he probably would have played in this one. If he'd been fully fit to play, you can well imagine Luke O'Nien playing left back, can't you? Because he's put him there before, but he wasn't deemed fit enough. But yeah, unfortunately for Arthur Masuaku, it just didn't work out for him.
Yeah, talking about where he was playing, I remember early on in this game we realised Masuaku definitely couldn't cross the ball. He had two efforts that just went straight out for a goal kick. But the other person who did make his debut in this game was Bertrand Traore as well in the Forest game. And we move into the next game, which was the first one against one of the big boys, against Manchester United. So we went to Old Trafford on the 4th of October. And this was our first test against what people consider to be the big six, I suppose. And we went from a position of strength. as I said, we moved into the top 4 after that win against Forest. Traore came straight into the first 11, Martin, and first couple of minutes, I remember Adingra went through, played a ball to the back post, and Traore was only a few yards out and made absolutely zero contact with the ball, where we thought, oh, he must be a little bit rusty. Luckily for him, he was offside. But at that point, I thought, bloody hell, we're in the top 4, just beating Forest away. And I thought we might actually go and beat Man United at Old Trafford here.
Yeah, this was a big game for Amarin as well, if I remember rightly. I think he was under intense pressure, and this was seen as a must-win game for him at the time as well. Traore had been brought in on deadline day alongside Brian Brobby, hadn't he, also from Ajax? And he'd been on the bench for the Palace game, the Villa game. He got a first outing off the bench at Forest. And I was really surprised that Lebris had chucked him into the first team away at Manchester United. But as we saw throughout the course of the season, whenever Traore was fit, Lebris tended to start him, didn't he? And whether it was his experience or whether he just likes the way he holds position, works back. He's a good player. I think he kind of grew into his role at the club over the spell I had in the team. But this was such a big game for us and a big game for Manchester United. As I say, if we'd gone ahead, which we could have done early on, I think we had a couple of opportunities to kind of open them up. That changes this game completely because they were desperate for a win. If we got ahead early in this game, it's a world of pain for them. But of course, they go 1-0 up within 10 minutes, 2-0 up within half an hour. And then we make changes, don't we? I think Ballard comes on for Adingra, who hadn't offered any defence. You can talk about Masuaku as much as we want. In this game, Adingra offered nothing defensively. Yeah. And you look at moments out the course of the season where you kind of go, Bristol have made his mind up on players, right? And you look at Mayenda's miss at Burnley. I don't think that's done for Mayenda forever, but I think that did for him for this season as a starting striker. This game did for Adingra because Lebris thought, I can't trust you to do that defensive work that we need in this team. We went to a back 5, didn't we? And it worked. We played really well after going 2-0 down, but of course it was too little too late by that point. But it was a big game, and it was pivotal for Simon Adingra.
Do you remember Nordy pulling all the players into a huddle as well when we went 2-0 down?
Yeah.
That felt pivotal in the game because after that point, we showed real character and strength and resilience, and it was almost like we don't concede again here, lads, because it was in danger of getting out of hand, wasn't it?
Well, it wasn't. I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you look at Xhaka coming in and his leadership, but Mukiele's leadership has been equally important, and for him to take control of that situation. He's only been at the club for 6 weeks or so at this point. For him to have the authority to do that is really impressive. It showed you everything you need to know about him as a character and as a person as well as a player, because he was massive in that. But I think the change in formation as well really helped because we went like for like with them because of course they were playing 5 at the back at the time, and we matched them up. And I think that's the first time that we've seen the Briscoe 5 at the back, hadn't we? He'd always been 4 at the back with us, although he had gone 5 at Lorient before. This was the first time we've seen it at Sunderland. And I think this then paves the way for a spell of football that we see over November, because he realises he's got the players to play that, and maybe hasn't got the wingers he thought he had for that defensive work.
Yeah. Yep, and then we did have a couple of weeks because we had an international break after the Manchester United game, which I think was part of the big story around Amarim, that if he didn't get a result against us, then that international break could have seen the end of him. I'm just looking up to the build-up to the next game, which was Wolves at the Stadium of Light on the 18th of October. And actually, one of the big stories that broke during that international break was that Stuart Harvey left Sunderland at that point, which was big news. And towards the end of the game, with building up to the game, the big stories in the press conferences whether the likes of Siddiqui and Alderete would be okay for the game because they had long flights and picked up injuries during the international break as well. But Wolves came to town and they were already having a rotten start to the season. And I think Gav, for this one, it was a bit of a strange one because we'd had such a good start of the season coming off the back of that Manchester United defeat, but we were still 7th in the table. And I think this Wolves game was actually the first time during this season where we had expectation and the fans were turning up to the stadium like expecting a win. And actually, the game probably didn't go as most fans expected, really, because Wolves were good on the day.
I was a little bit surprised by how decent they were. And it's a funny one with Wolves, isn't it? Because they had such an awful season, but on lots of occasions throughout the season, they actually turned up in games. Kind of reminds me a little bit of us under McCarthy in 05-06 when we stunk the gaff out points wise, but actually in a lot of games we were competitive and we gave teams a good game, and it just kind of felt a bit later on in matches and things like that. Wolves were a bit like that this season. And I actually remember one of my mates after the game saying to us, what it is? That's one of the best teams we've seen here for a while. Actually, Wolves, they played really, really well, because you've got to remember, we didn't get that second goal till the 90th minute, and it was an own goal. So it was a close game for the most part. But one thing we did do is we got a relatively early goal, didn't we? And it was through Nordy Mukiele, who played a lovely little 1-2 and then got on the end of it and finished it. And that's we actually, I think, in a lot of games at home in particular where we thought, right, we should win today, we didn't thrive as much as we did being the underdog, and that was probably another one of those days, wasn't it? Where, yeah, we got the result, but it wasn't a particularly startling performance. And to be honest, I don't mind that. Winning we got 3 points, we got a clean sheet. It was job done ultimately. Well, there was nothing worrying off the back of this. There was, we didn't come out the game thinking, shit, is there something deeper to look at here or what have you? We were fine. We were just fine. It wasn't a bad performance. It wasn't a great performance. Dan Neil also got off the bench in this game, one of his rare Premier League appearances, didn't he? He got a couple of minutes in injury time as we were trying to see the game out. I think this was probably around the time that the manager was starting to get a firm idea of what his best side was. Obviously, Brobby wasn't involved. But if you look at the team which played the game, Nordy playing, Hume playing, Xhaka, Ballard, Alderete, Traore, who at that point had just come into the team, and if he'd stayed fit, might have been a lot more important to us, but he was trusted. There weren't many positions up for grabs, is what I'm saying. I think he was starting to get a firm idea, wasn't he? You lads mentioned before about maybe losing a bit of trust in Adingra, and Mayenda had lost some trust. Adingra didn't even get off the bench in this game. Our £25 million winger didn't even get off the bench in this game, but Dan Neil did. Shems and Talby did. Mayenda did. So, it was, again, not one for the ages, but it's still an important 3 points because we were, I don't know what rate at which we were picking points per game up at this stage, but we were 7th in the table, which is a very, very healthy start to be in mid-October and be 7th in the table. And if I remember rightly as well, the table was very close at that point. Other than Arsenal and Man City at the top end, there wasn't much going on between the rest. So we were starting to dream a bit. I remember around this time, and we'll probably talk a lot more about this after the next game we're about to cover. But I remember this was about the time when the pundits on Monday Night Football were talking about Sunderland and going, hang on, this isn't just a regular newly promoted team. They're a little bit different, these lads.
Yeah, don't peak too soon, Gav. We're about to come on to that conversation. But actually, just to bookmark the Wolves game, it was, looking at my notes, I was saying we had to fight, we had to battle. It was the 4th clean sheet in 8 games as well, which I think was important. But the other note that I made that day was the fact that we were picking up wins when we weren't playing particularly well, which I thought was the best sign at that point. Just a quick question for you at this point, because you slightly mentioned it, but there's 2 players who were on the bench, 2 outfield players who were on the bench the most times this season on 20 occasions. Who do you reckon those 2 were?
Ooh,
20.
Chris Rigg.
Chris Rigg was one of them. Who was the other one?
Hertrauda?
Nope.
Mayenda?
Nope.
Isdor.
Nope.
O'Nien?
Nope.
Patterson.
Nope.
Dan Neil?
Outfield players. Dan Neil it was.
Wow.
So the two top outfield players who were on the bench the most times this season were Chris Rigg and Dan Neil on 20 occasions. But like Gav says, we need to get into our last game for part one, because again, these two have gassed so much. We didn't really get to the point that we wanted to. But a massive game at Stamford Bridge, which again was absolutely ridiculous in terms of where we maybe thought we were going to be and where we were, because at the time this was a top of the table clash, because Chelsea got off to a good start during the season, and up top for Chelsea was Mark Guiu, who we mentioned for our League Cup campaign, I suppose, against Huddersfield Town, which didn't go to plan. But in this game, Martin, again, we talk about Lebris at this point changing it up depending on the situation, depending on the opposition. He went to a back five at this one, and 4 minutes in, we got caught down the flanks. I'm fairly certain it was Trey Hume maybe pushing too far up in terms of that wing back position. They got in behind, and Garnacho opened the scoring after 4 minutes. And based on our Premier League experience, Martin, you just kind of slumped at this point and thought, oh, well, that's it. We're not getting anything today apart from Chelsea going behind after 4 minutes.
Well, it was a funny one, wasn't it? Because we'd proven that we can play at home, pick points up at home, and play well and grind results out at home. Our away games so far, obviously the Burnley game where we got beat, we got a result against Forest without, that was a defensive performance that got the result against Forest. It wasn't an earth-shattering attacking performance. We've got a defensive performance at Palace and kept clean sheets in both those games. The Manchester United game we conceded early and kind of done for. And you're going into this game going, we need to keep it tight. We need to kill the game off. We need to dull it down, defend really well, and try to get a goal on the break. And within 4 minutes, going to a back five, we're absolutely sliced open. And it looks so easy for him to score. And you just go, it's going to be a bloody long afternoon, this, isn't it? And that was the feeling. I think, it speaks to the character of this team and the organisation, the determination, whatever else you want to say, that we were able to kind of consolidate ourselves, regroup, and see out that next period. Because if I remember rightly, Chelsea went for the jugular, really. They went to get that second goal to really try to kill us off. And we defended well. And then, 20 minutes later, we managed to get an equaliser, which levels it, and it puts a whole different complexion on the game. But to ride out that 20 minutes against a team like Chelsea, who were doing well at the time, it showed, again, the character of this group of players that we've got and the experience, the likes of Ronaldo, Mukiele, Geertruida had come in. I think this was Geertruida's first start, if I remember rightly, wasn't it? And he'd come in because Alderete had got injured. So he had to force, he'd be forced to swap a couple of things around. And Geertruida played exceptionally well. Traore again started on the right-hand side. And we went a little defensive. The thing I remember most about this game was how advanced Xhaka was playing. Because I think this was the first time we've seen Xhaka really almost lead that press. And if I remember rightly as well, I think this was a game afterwards, Maresca had said he'd got really caught out by the fact that we played five at the back. And he was really shocked, and that's what he'd put the outcome down to. But the standout thing for me was how we managed to stick into that game for the 20 minutes that followed the goal, get the equaliser, and then it's a whole different ball game, isn't it, after we get that goal to go 1-1.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And like looking at the beginning of the game and looking at after Isidore got the equaliser, just looking at my notes for half time way back when, and I was saying brilliant half, defended well, broke well. Chelsea had about 70% of the possession, but I was saying we were playing really well. As he said, it's come out since Lebris said before this game, Xhaka gave a rousing speech telling the other players that we were going to win this game, Gav. And the other thing was, this is Isidore's running the team during this season. You know, he scored against West Ham, he scored against Brentford, he scored against Chelsea, he scored against Villa as well. This was Isidore's running the team just to get back in this game and look the better team against Chelsea and then come out with the 3 points and go second in the table. I mean, I wanted to say this was a bit of a high point in the season. Of course, we've got the last day of the season, but I just remember being on cloud nine after this, being in complete dreamland.
Yeah, it was the day of my wedding, so I didn't watch it live. But the scores were filtering through while we were doing.
For what reason
best
was this
man
day
speeches.
brilliant then?
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
What was the highlight of the day, Gav?
This was the cherry on the wedding cake. It was.
All right, you all
yeah,
lasses and listen, man. Come on.
people she works with listen though, so best be careful. No, it was strange that day for me because obviously I'm totally engrossed in my wedding, but the game's going on, and I'm in a room full of Sunderland fans who have missed the game to be there. They're all obviously watching it on their phones on the sly, like, you know. And when the winning goal, the news of the winning goal came through, the place erupted during the best man speeches. It was obviously the next day I watched the game in full, and then I listened to the reaction pod that you did after, and you were just blown away. It was almost like you were reacting to Sunderland winning something or beating Newcastle. Do you know what I mean? It almost had that significance about it. I think this was us realising that we'd arrived. We'd went away to the team who had just won the Club World Cup and had won a European trophy and asserted ourselves and showed we're a good team and done it in the most dramatic way, right at the end of the game on the counter-attack. You know, Hertrauda lumps it forward to Brobby. Brobby held up several double-decker buses while he was waiting for somebody to make a run off him, and a great finish and absolute pandemonium in the away end. I think it's one of the best ways to win a game, innit? Lush.
Just quickly, Gav, was this the day that Talby and Brobby properly introduced themselves to Sunderland fans as Sunderland players?
I think especially Brobby, because we didn't know much about him. He'd been eased in. He was still being eased in up until the new year, really. You know, it wasn't, even at this point, he was just coming off the bench here and there, wasn't he? He wasn't playing lots of minutes. I think if you look at his actual minutes, Brobby didn't play 90 minutes until January, I think. So it was just a case of we were working these players out. We didn't know much about them. And with Brobby, I'd obviously heard about him and seen bits and pieces from when he signed, but I didn't know he had that in his locker. Obviously, the way he holds the ball up has become the key feature of his all-round game, hasn't it? And has been the main reason why he's gathered attention from people even outside of Sunderland. And it was just a bit of old-fashioned forward play, really. In fact, old-fashioned football. Route one, get it forward, hold it up, lay it off, put it in the back of the net. It was fabulous. But Talby had, as we'll get on to as this little series progresses, Talby had several moments like this through the season where he just pops up with goals in big games. I think he's a very young man. He's still learning his way. He's still feeling his way into things at Sunderland, even now at the end of the full season. But in big games or against big opponents like Newcastle, Chelsea, and Liverpool in particular, he came up with goals, and I think that's a good thing looking into the future, is that we've got a player who just seems to turn up in big games. Because it wasn't a straightforward finish from him, was it? Really, you know, he still had to bury it. Some players might have went the other way. They might have took several touches. Now he just calmly sort of passed it into the bottom corner, didn't he? Yeah, fantastic. Just a great way to win a game. And obviously we come to know and love Brobby in particular a lot more as the season went on. But this was probably the first hint of what we were going to get.
Yeah, well, I think this is a great point to end this part, because we've gone second in the table, and we did want to get to the halfway point of the season, but as I said, these two lads can talk for England, so it's best leave it there at this point. I just leaves me to say thank you very much, Gav and Martin, for your time in this part. It's been a joy to go through those early memories of the early part of the season, and looking forward to getting into the rest of it. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. Don't forget, we'll come up obviously with the next part of this season review, but there's something going on every day on the Roker Report website throughout the summer, and of course planned, as we said up top, And it's only around 3 weeks until the fixtures for the next season are released, so we better get on recording the rest of this review. But from us,